All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Knox PHP, September 21st. So like I said earlier, please don't forget to sign in. We're giving a 1-year subscription away for any JetBrains product of your choice. Without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Joe Ferguson here, who's going to be talking about all things Laravel.
Yeah. George, grab the HTML with you. Dumpster fire. 1 second here to arrange my displays.
It's that notebook over there right by the computer.
So this amazing thing just happened where I just learned that you didn't move that menu bar. I didn't know that was a thing. I've always was like, why does it put it on the other screen?
I don't think we need the presentation. I like it.
So once more, you just drag that little bar there
Yeah.
to whatever monitor, and it's amazing. Yeah, thanks for coming, everybody. Let me figure out. Where did my cursor go? There it is. Okay. All right, let me turn the mic on so you can hear me. That's probably better. All right, welcome to all the Laravel things up and running to making money. Just a small disclaimer, I'm not going to actually show you how to make money. I'm going to show you how to take money from people with Laravel tools. So yeah, if you were here for the secrets of business or that next SaaS idea, I don't have it. So who am I? My name is Joe Ferguson. I'm a PHP developer. I've been a professional PHP developer for about 12 years. A hobbyist developer for a lot longer than that. I'm an engineer at Industry Brands. I work on a PHP church CMS application there. I've been there for about 2 months now. I think my two-month anniversary is in a couple days. Relatively new to the company, and before that I worked for AOL. I worked on a custom CMS there, and I worked at other agencies, primarily on CMSs. So I've kind of been in CMSs since 2006, 2007, and it's just kind of interesting work that I've just kind of made a career out of unintentionally, because CMSs are all terrible. I'm the organizer for Memphis PHP. You can find me on Twitter. I'm an OSMI board member, if you've ever heard of open sourcing mental illness. I also host Nomad PHP Lightning Talks, which Nomad PHP is actually happening in about an hour. Nomad PHP is the user group for people who don't have user groups. It is a monthly thing that you can buy a subscription to. I'm not here to sell you on that, but I'm here to sell you on the Lightning Talks, which are actually free. If you search Nomad PHP on YouTube, you will find the Lightning Talks that we record every month, except for this month because I'm here. And there's free Lightning Talks. They're 10-minute talks that are kind of like a deep dive into a topic that's PHP related, or a very brief overview of a really broad topic that's PHP related. So I always like to start talks off with kind of where should you go from here? If you like what I'm talking about here tonight, where should you go after this? Matt Stauffer wrote an amazing book called Laravel Up and Running. He's currently upgrading it to the new, or updating it to the new version of Laravel that was just released this past month, Laravel 5.5. There's also Easy Laravel from at easylaravelbook.com. I don't know if that one's been updated for the newest version yet, but also another really great resource. So before we go too far into what Laravel is, has anybody ever used Laravel? Is anybody using Laravel now? Okay, y'all might not get too much out of this, because this is designed as kind of a primer of the community and kind of what the framework is and what it's all about. So what drove me to Laravel, or what made me find Laravel, was an old blog post by Dale Reese. If you were ever playing around with Laravel in the 2 and 3 days, you probably know Dale Reese because he was one of the only people out there writing blogs about Laravel at the time. And what caught my eye was this expressive and beautiful syntax. And it just kind of threw me. I'm like, wait, code as expressive and beautiful? I've got to see this. And they're absolutely correct. I mean, the code is beautiful. You know, it's almost prose-worthy. It's tailored for your team. It's really easy to work together in a team environment because of the database migrations. Stuff like that is baked right in. They say it's a modern toolkit. It really is. It's probably the biggest selling point. Laravel is probably one of the best examples of modern PHP where convention is done over configuration, as opposed to Symfony where you do all of the configuration over convention. So if you looked at Symfony before and it was too much work for you, Laravel is probably your speed. However, if you love Symfony, Laravel is probably something you're going to hate, just because they take two completely different opposite approaches to a full stack framework. They also say that it's a pinch of magic. I use the word pinch liberally because it is a full stack framework, it is an opinionated framework, and there's lots of magic. But it's relatively cool magic. So if you're not familiar with the Laravel ecosystem, there's kind of three main parts. There's a bunch of tools built around Laravel, there's the framework core, and then there's this entire learning and community ecosystem built around it as well. So some of the tools are Lumen, which is a micro framework. If you've ever worked with Slim PHP or Zen Expressive, and there's another one built on Symfony that I'm forgetting about, it's similar to that. If you wanted to start an API project tomorrow, I would probably tell you to start with Lumen and then go from there. Envoyer is a paid service that allows you to do zero downtime deployments. It essentially creates virtual hosts or virtual host files and downloads and deploys your application and then swaps a symlink for your virtual host. So you can deploy without going down. It's really kind of cool to do that. It's an automated system. It is paid. If you subscribe to that, it goes directly to Taylor Otwell, the author of the framework. So that's one of the products that actually supports the Laravel framework directly. Forge is another product that supports Laravel directly. Forge is server management as a service. If you hate configuring LAMP stacks on Linux, specifically Ubuntu, Forge is a paid solution that you can pay monthly, and Forge will manage your servers. It'll install your applications for you, configure your applications, essentially how a Laravel application is expected to be set up. Spark, another paid solution. If you have a SaaS idea, but you loathe the thought of writing the action controllers to log a user in, or register a user, or user password resets, or you just don't want to write the code to connect to Stripe's API to bill somebody, let alone have to figure out how VAT tax works in Europe, you can buy a Spark license for $300 and Spark does all that stuff for you. Spark is a kind of a bootstrapped Laravel project that has everything in a SaaS product except for the service. So you have a service idea, you install Spark, and you start building your idea. It's a shortcut to hacking on what you really want to work on as a developer, which is usually the cool domain logic things around your application. So on the learning side, there's Laracast. If you've ever heard of Laravel, you've probably heard of Laracast. It is essentially Railscast if you're from the Rails community. It's a video series. Jeffrey Way runs that. He's down in Chattanooga. He is an amazing teacher. I can learn just about anything from him. He has a really great voice. He has a really great way of explaining really complex topics. There's also the forums there on the Laracast site are also really great for getting help and support, trying to figure out what you're doing wrong. Larajobs is a great jobs platform specifically for Laravel. If you are looking for a Laravel job, that's a great place to start. This bottom logo, it looks like the Slack logo, or it's the Slack colors, it's actually Larachat. So if you go to larachat.slack.com, you can join the official Laravel Slack community. There's tons of people there. Great place to get help on a wide variety of topics. So a quick note on versions. Laravel does not follow semantic versioning. And this is unfortunate because it makes it a little bit more difficult to figure out what's going on in versions. So if you think about semantic version where you have major, minor, and a patch, you have three numbers, Laravel just ignores the patch and moves everything over one. So 5.5 and 5.4 is a huge breaking change. That's a major version jump for Laravel. So it's not semantic versioning, but it's kind of semantic versioning. So they just released 5.5 at Laracon EU this past, only a couple weeks ago. And 5.5 is the second LTS release for Laravel. So if you're going to start a project today, start on 5.5. The previous LTS version was 5.1. It's coming up on about 2.5 or 3 years, maybe 4 years old. The LTS releases are going to get bug fixes for 2 years and security fixes for 3 years. Now this is important because this is the official stated policy, but the followed policy, what actually happens is they've gone all the way back to 4.2, which I think is 6 years old now, and done all the security updates and made it PHP 7 compatible. So they go above and beyond to get security fixes backported all the way back as far as they can, as well as keeping you updated with the newest version of PHP. Now jumping from Laravel 4.2 to 5.1 is a huge step. That's an app rewrite. That is a new project creation and dragging and dropping a lot of information, and hopefully you have amazing test suites to help test that to figure out what broke. Now, the non-LTS bug releases get bug fixes for 6 months, security fixes for a year. Again, they still have all of these other versions are patched up. They're all ready to go. You can use really whichever one you want. There's 5.1, 5.2, 5.3, 5.4, 5.5, and 5.6 is probably already being worked on. 5.5 is the only LTS version that's still around. 5.1 is still LTS. I really feel bad for the people who are still on 5.1 and trying to do 5.5 upgrades. That is brutal. So the thing that I can recommend for you is if you're working on your own project, always use the newest version of Laravel. If you're working on a client project that you don't have an awesome support contract for, where they're not going to pay you to babysit this, you know, for 40 hours a week, 30 hours a week or so, go with an LTS, because they need to stay on a stable platform, but you don't have, and if they're not going to pay you to upgrade every major version that comes along, from 5.5 to 5.6 to 5.7 going forward, stick them on an LTS, it's not the end of the world. It just so happens at this point in time, the newest version is also the newest LTS, which doesn't happen very often in Laravel. So getting Laravel, there's a couple different ways you can get it. We're going to use, here in this example, it uses Composer to grab the Laravel installer. This is just a handy way of being able to say Laravel new, and you can give it a project name. Old screenshot where I'm creating a quick start basic 5.3 app. But essentially it uses Composer to go out and fetch and install Laravel to the folder that you told it. You can also just use Composer to create project, that still works. You just tell it, create project, tell it the distribution that you prefer, and then give it a path. In this case, it's blog. So for local development, Vagrant is the kind of preferred de facto dev environment. There's also Laravel Valet that's managed by Adam Wathan. Laravel Valet is a great solution if you don't have the resources on your machine to run Vagrant. I caution you because I caution people all the time, you should practice how you play. And what I mean by that is if you're running Linux and Ubuntu in production, you should develop on Ubuntu Linux. The people that I see running MAMP or XAMPP or whatever these other solutions are, if you're not deploying to those, which you shouldn't be because those are insecure tools, please don't deploy to those. Why are you deving on them? So it's the philosophy of you should practice how you play and you should get as close to your production environment and your development environment as you can. I'm a pretty big fan of Homestead. I'm actually the maintainer for Homestead right now. So I have a little bit of bias towards Homestead. What is in Homestead? You get a ton of stuff. If you've never played with Vagrant before, Vagrant is an application that sits between you and a virtual machine hypervisor, usually VirtualBox. You can also support VMware, and Homestead in particular also supports Parallels. So if you have Parallels or VMware, you can use Homestead. Homestead comes with Ubuntu 16.04. It actually comes with PHP 7.1, 7.0, and 5.6 out of the box now. You can use any of those versions of PHP that you want with Nginx. If you want to use Apache, you can use Apache, but you lose the ability to run multiple versions of PHP just because of the nature of Mod Apache. We support MySQL, MariaDB, SQLite, there's Beanstalk, Memcache, Gulp, Grunt, Bower, there's tons of front-end tooling there for you automatically. All this stuff is configured out of the box with reasonable defaults. If you've looked at the Homestead or the Laravel configuration, you notice that a lot of the usernames default to Homestead, a lot of the passwords default to secret. It's because it's designed to be inherently insecure. So there's two ways you can get Homestead. You can just clone the repo, and then you can go into the folder and then run this init script. And there's one for Windows as well. It'll run really well in Windows or Mac or Linux. Now this is for what's kind of regarded as the global installation method of Homestead. This is where you would have one virtual machine and you would add multiple sites to it. So if you have 10 Laravel projects that you would work on normally, you would have 10 sites in this one VM. It's an efficient way to do development. Now, because I like to be difficult and opinionated just like every other developer, how I use Homestead is a little different. I use the Homestead per project method of installation, which is in the documentation. It is a part of Homestead. You essentially require Homestead like any other composer dependency, just by saying require --dev Laravel Homestead, and this pulls down only the required files to put Homestead in your project. Once you have it in Composer, you can just say Homestead make, and it will say Homestead install. You just copy over the bare minimum to start up the Vagrant box in your project. So what is this aliases? This is an aliases file that will get added to your project root from the make command. This is what Homestead will copy into the Vagrant user to help with shortcuts. This is how you can have PHP unit, PHP spec, and run the artisan command without having to type out the full paths, right? Just kind of developer friendly ways of making your life easier. Now you configure Homestead. If you've ever played with Vagrant, you're probably familiar with the Vagrant file, and you have to configure everything there, and you have provisioning scripts. With Homestead, you don't have to do that with any of those files. Homestead just uses defaults that we've got configured. So this is my homestead.yaml file, and this is where we tell Homestead, okay, this is the IP I want you to use, this is how much RAM, I'm going to give you this many CPUs, this is my host name, this is the provider I'm going to use, this is going to be VirtualBox or VMware or Parallels, Hyper-V if you are feeling very froggy. You can set up your SSH keys, and down here at the bottom, your folders. This is how you actually map your projects from your local computer into the VM. Because the idea of Vagrant, one of the fundamental principles, is that you can tear this machine down and spin it back up and not lose any data. If you're putting anything in your VM that you need, that is important, you're doing it wrong. You should always be able to spin up the Vagrant machine the same way every time. So here we're going to map a full project or a path on my hard drive, and we're going to map it into this folder in the VM. And then we're going to create a site pointing to the public folder, because that's just the default for Laravel. And we're going to map the name homestead.app. So with those three commands, and I didn't, because I'm using the per project when I ran the make command, this is all automatic. So I ran 3 commands, and I can now do Vagrant up. This is the easiest way I've ever seen anybody be able to add Vagrant to a legacy or any PHP application. So when you run Vagrant up, it first checks to make sure you have the newest version of the box. If you don't, it warns you, it says, hey, there's an update, you should probably go update, and then it continues to boot. If you don't have the box at all, it'll take a few minutes as it downloads the box. The box is about a gig, so it is kind of hard that first time you do Vagrant up. And then what we do is we configure some network interfaces, and then it forwards ports. So what we're doing here is we're taking port 8000 on your local host and mapping it into the guest, which is the VM, to port 80. And we're doing the same thing for 44300, 33060, 4320, and 2222. So you have Nginx or Apache, you have SSL, you have MySQL, you have Postgres, and since I took that screenshot, we've actually added a couple more, specifically something for MailHog, which allows you to do capture local mail, so you can actually test legitimate mail coming out of your application. Once we've done all that, we actually boot the machine, and then Vagrant takes over through SSH and runs everything else that we need to start interacting with the machine. So once the machine's up and running, we just say Vagrant SSH, and then we're getting dumped into a Ubuntu shell, which is pure Linux. Everything's mapped to Vagrant. So we CD into the folder that we mapped, which this is a totally different screenshot, different project. This is what happens when I give this talk over 3 major versions of Laravel. So we inspect it, and you see here, this is our Laravel project. This is the same thing you would see in your editor on your local machine. Now because we made that homestead.app, we need to add this to our hosts. Now this is optional, largely. If you ever do more than one site in a homestead VM, you have to do this because it's per project, it's optional because you can always just use localhost 8000. There's only one server to connect to. There's only one server that'll ever be there. As soon as you add another site to that, that stops working just because of how virtual hosts work in Nginx and Apache. So we know that we mapped port 8000 to port 80 in the VM. So we can go to our homestead.app and we'll see that our host file override DNS is working. And because we map the port, we can do localhost 8000, we see the same thing. Now when you're done working, and you probably realize by now, you're virtualizing an entire computer. It takes a lot of resources. So you probably want to shut that down, or maybe even destroy it. So the typical Vagrant commands are halt and destroy. Halt is the same thing as doing sudo shutdown. Halt is a reboot, or sorry, halt is a shutdown. Destroy is a shutdown and then destroy everything that I just created. Now, when you destroy, you're only deleting the local instance of this Vagrant machine. Earlier, when you did Vagrant up for the first time, you downloaded that box file. It goes into a hidden folder off your root user drive called .vagrant.d. That's where Vagrant keeps all of its boxes, the base boxes. And when you do Vagrant up, it copies it from that folder into this project folder. So whenever you're using Vagrant, you're manipulating a VM, you're manipulating a copy of it. That way you can destroy this and then do Vagrant up immediately and you're right back up and running with a fresh copy of the VM. That's really the power of Vagrant because you don't have to sit there and install Ubuntu. You don't have to configure LAN. So here per project, you don't want to version control your homestead.yaml. I showed you earlier, mine had the full path. Unless you're all using my laptop or you're all using my username, you're going to have a bad time trying to make that work. So you don't control that, you just tell everybody that's working on your project to run the make command, and that make command will set up the homestead YAML file exactly for that computer. Any questions yet? I have some of these sprinkled in there. I removed a bunch of them, but any questions so far? All right. So getting started with Laravel. If you've ever used any other MVC framework, Laravel's going to feel really similar. It's very MVC-ish. Like most full-stack frameworks, it's really opinionated, like most developers too. So you can override just about any of these things that you want. And I went the wrong way. Oh, back. So the project structure hasn't actually changed much. This is from 5.3. This folder looks very much the same. The core application logic is going to be found in your app folder. This is going to be where your controllers are. Specifically, controllers are broken out into HTTP by default. You also have console, you have exceptions, you have middleware, and you have providers. So obviously your middlewares are going to be your middleware classes. If you've ever done anything with middleware, you probably have a good idea what it is. If you've never done anything with middleware, if you think about your application and a request coming in as an onion, middleware is a layer, and you can reject or alter the request based on one of those layers via middleware. It's really powerful. Think about somebody trying to make a request into your application, and if you're using an off middleware, you can actually reject the request before it touches any controllers or any of your domain logic. So you can actually get a response back to the client very, very quickly. I don't know if that was my laptop or not. Something happened. Yeah.
Somebody received an email.
Okay. So you also have auth. You can have auth controllers. You can separate your controllers. You should remember that this is PSR4 namespace. So the namespace for this controller is going to be app HTTP controllers auth. And the fun thing here is, where are the models? Well, they're in the models folder, aren't they? No. Laravel hasn't had a models folder since 4.2, and people have been asking where it is since 4.2. It is the most annoying thing until you start working with a lot of models or a lot of repositories, and then it kind of makes sense. The models are way down here, and right now we just have one user model, which is the default. They're in the app folder. It's a terrible place for them, but it kind of makes sense. Once you get it down into the trenches, it kind of feels a little bit better. Just one of those nuances of Laravel, I guess. So the config folder, this is the anti-Symfony. This is where the Symfony fans cry, because this is all the stuff that Symfony does by hand. Laravel does it for you, and gives you relatively sensible defaults. It's like if you wanted to use memcache, you just have to kind of tell the environment variable to use memcache, and the configuration for memcache in the cache file is already there. The database stuff, MySQL connection for Homestead is already there. You don't have to touch that configuration file. You just have to tell your environment variables, hey, I want to use MySQL. You can configure file systems, mail, queue, services, session. You can configure file systems in such a way that you can mount and access files on S3 just like they were sitting on your server. It's really awesome. It's done via a package called Fly System, which is part of the League of Extraordinary Packages. If you've never looked at Fly System, it is fantastic. If you do a lot with remote files, whether it's over FTP or SFTP or S3 or any of those other block storage services like S3, check that out. You can do some pretty incredible stuff with it. The database folder is broken out into 3 different subfolders. We have factories, we have migrations, and we have seeds. So your migrations are your classes that create your tables. There's an ORM in Laravel called Eloquent, and it's using Eloquent constructs in your migrations. So when you start building a Laravel app, the first thing you're going to need is a users table, so Laravel gives you one of those. And they're timestamped, because they need to be timestamped and they are run in the order in which they're timestamped for the first time. So if you have users, you're probably going to need a create password resets function or table to handle password resets for your users. So Laravel kind of starts you off with this and kind of help you get on your way and get things going. Now, while these create your database tables, your factories and your seeds are how you can set up fake data in your database for testing. Or real data, if you wanted to. I don't really advise that. Use the fake data, that's a safer way. If you've never dealt with factories before, factory is a pattern, it's a design pattern where you have a class that creates instances of itself. So we would have a model factory for a user, and it would be enough functionality to create and save a user object to our database. And we could take that model that can create a user, and we could put it in a database seeder, and when we run our database seeders, we can tell it to add 10 users from the user factory. So the user factory will run 10 times and save 10 users. And there's another library that's built in called Faker that uses fake data. So you can get realistic looking user data into your application. The public folder, this is kind of where a lot of the things get kicked off from. This is what you expose to your virtual host. This is where everything is bootstrapped out of index.php. That's where all of the requests for the framework come in. This is also where your compiled JavaScript assets and your compiled CSS assets will live. The resources folder, this is where all of your public assets go before they're optimized, before they're compiled. This is where your language translations are going to be. This is where your JavaScript, your CSS, your LESS files, your SCSS files, also where all your views are. And Laravel comes with a templating engine called Blade. Blade is not a difficult templating engine to use. It's essentially find and replace PHP. It's a little bit better than just using PHP for your views, because it is a templating engine. There is a templating syntax that you kind of have to use. And it kind of keeps you out of trouble in regards to sanitizing data as you display it. You also have a routes file or folder. And you have 3 routes files off the bat. And I believe 5.5 added a 4th one, and I haven't gotten around to looking into that yet. So you have 3 routes files. One is for the API, one's for console, and one's for web. So just starting out, you're probably going to want web, because this is where you would route to your HTTP controllers. Console is for closures. If you're writing console applications with Laravel, which Laravel makes it really easy to do, you'll probably have a lot of reusable logic that does some kind of domain or business functionality on the console. You can put that into the console routes and be able to route to that logic easily and reference it. Also, the routes API is prefixed by the /API folder. So anything you write in the API routes will automatically be treated as an API. It'll also have different middleware applied to it. So web has specific middleware attached to it, so does API. Like API has the rate limiting and the token checking built into the middleware for those routes, just because they're broken out in these different route files. So we talk about model factories. So this is an example of creating a user model factory where we're just going to say, we're going to define a user class, and we're going to create a closure that creates this faker instance, and we're just going to tell faker, okay, we're going to return an array, but we want a name and an email that's unique, and it's a safe email, which means it's actually a legitimate email that would look real. And then we're going to say password equals password if we set a password, or just use secret. We're going to decrypt it because we know what we're doing with password authentication. And then this will create one user. So our user migrations, these are the files that create our database schemas. You have an up method and you have a down method. The up method is run when you run the command php artisan migrate. It tells artisan, which is the CLI component of the framework, to hey, go run all my migrations that I have set up. So here we're using the schema create, and we're going to create a schema called users, a table. We're going to pass in this table object, and we're going to say we want an incremental field named ID. We want a string field named name. We're going to have a string that's going to be named email, a column email, and it's going to have to be unique because we don't want people registering with the same email. We're also going to have a string password, and then we're going to have two helper functions here. One is a remember token, which just handles the token for the remember me password resets, or the password logging in to remember me cookie session tokens. And then we have this timestamps. Timestamps is a shortcut for creating the two columns created at and updated at. That way, whenever your model is saved or updated, those fields are updated. So you'll always have the created at and updated at dates whenever you have an instance of your model. This is just really helpful because typically you have to write that code yourself. If you follow the Laravel way of doing it with Eloquent, you'll never have to set those fields yourself. Eloquent takes care of that for you. Now, what this translates to, because we're not specifying a database engine here, right? We're not saying Postgres here, we're not saying MySQL here. Eloquent will take this and look at it and say, okay, I see that you want a string name. If I'm using MySQL, I know that should be a varchar 255 default. If you're using Postgres, well, it should maybe be something else. I'm not a Postgres expert, so maybe it is varchar 255. But it translates these into the appropriate fields or column types for that engine. Your migrations also have a down method. And this runs if you ever need to roll back your migrations. If you ran a migration and everything is on fire, you can roll back the migration. It should always be the exact opposite of what the up method did. So when we went up, we created a schema. Coming down, it's a lot easier. You can just drop it. Now, I'll caution you, I have never, in all of my years, I've been playing with Laravel since Laravel 3, I have never once rolled back migrations in production. That is a terrifying concept to me. I will burn a server farm down before I do that, because I know at least I have backups I can restore to. So a lot of people are talking about making this go away, and a lot of developers don't even use this. I will leave it up to you to whether or not you use it. When I'm writing code to show other people, I write this stuff because I want to show them the correct way. In all my personal projects, you'll rarely see this, because if I'm having to roll back a database, I'm just going to open up SQL Pro and blow it out manually. I don't care about rolling it back. I just want to blow it out myself and then rerun my migrations. That's also a personal preference, so take that with a grain of salt. We also talked about database seeders, how we can get fake data into our database. So here, there's two ways of doing it. You can create a database seeder class, and you can tell this run method on the database seeder class to run, like we have a widget seeder up there that would seed a widget model. You can either set it up like this, where it just executes a factory, or you can add the class. It's totally up to you. But here we're going to say, when we run our database seeds, I want you to run the user factory 5 times and create. So that'll create 5 users every time you run those. Now you can run your migrations once. If you keep telling Artisan to run migrate, it's not going to keep running your migrations. You can database seed to your heart's content. It will never stop. If you put 5,000 in there, pack a lunch. It'll take a minute, depending on how you're running. So I've been talking about Artisan. What is Artisan? Artisan is the CLI component for interacting with a framework. If you've ever played with KPHP, it's essentially similar to it was a baked binary that they used to have, or maybe they still do. But it's essentially how you interact with the framework as a whole from the command line. There's a ton of commands. And the most important part of Artisan, especially during development, is the make commands. Because the make commands can scaffold out a ton of functionality for you. Now, a lot of developers hear that and they say, oh no, I don't want to use precompiled code. I don't want to use scaffolding. That's stuff you throw away. Well, back in older frameworks that used to do a lot of scaffolding, you did throw that code away because it wasn't production type code. You don't throw away much of this stuff. Most of the stuff I throw away out of this is the comments because I don't care, or I rewrite the comments. So it's a lot of stuff that will be generated for you and kind of guide you in the Laravel way of doing it. So if you want to create a new controller, you just say make controller and the controller name. If you want to create a migration, you can say artisan make migration. And then you always want to, especially with your migrations, you want to use human language. You don't want to sound like a robot. You want it to be easy to read, because when you're trying to figure out in 6 months WTF this migration does, you want to be able to say, oh, that creates a widgets table. This makes sense. So we created this widgets table, and we're going to have our up method, and we're going to have the increments ID, we're going to have a name on our widget, we're going to have a description, and we're going to create a float for our price. And we're going to say we want 8 digits and then 2 decimal places for our price, because we're talking about money here. We're also going to do the timestamps so we can have our created at and our updated at. And because I'm showing you lovely folks how to do this, I'm going to show you the down method. Also, showing you this other method here. You can use schema drop, or you can use schema drop with exists. Totally optional. Now when you run Artisan Migrate, it'll look at the database it has already, and it will look and see if there's a migrations table. If there is a migrations table, it'll figure out what migrations haven't been run yet, and run them. Excuse me. Sorry. That was awful. Alright. So if there haven't been any migrations run, or if there's not a migrations table, it'll create the table for you and run all the migrations. So we have the 2 that came with Laravel, because you can tell the timestamps, 2004, 10, 12, and you can see when I created this, it's about time to update, 2006, 10, 15, and then timestamp. So they're always run in order. So if you ever need to cheat and say, well, I really want something else created before my widgets, just go flood to timestamps. So now we can inspect the database, and because we're using Homestead, we can just connect to localhost on 33060. The username is Homestead. What's the password?
Secret.
Secret, because I have it on the slide, and it's inherently insecure. Nobody cares. We're not deploying this to production. This isn't Docker. So we can look at the database, and we can see that our widgets table has been created, along with our others. And we can see that our name turned out to be a varchar 255. Our description is a text field. Our price is a double, with the 8 and 2 that we specified. Now let's make a model. So we can say artisan make model widget. Now in Laravel land, you should keep your models singular because they could normally represent one instance or one row of your table. Your controllers should be plural. That's just kind of convention. If you follow the Laravel conventions, a lot of the magic will just work for you, and you won't have to figure out why isn't this join table working right, why isn't my pivot table working, where's my model folder, all of that kind of makes more sense. So we look at our model, namespace app, and then we're going to extend this eloquent model, and then we're going to create this fillable array. And the reason we create this fillable array is by default, all Laravel models are guarded, which means you can't do mass assignment until you fill out this fillable array. What we're saying here is we want to allow mass assignment for name, description, and price, but nothing else. Now we don't have to do the created at and updated at fields here because Eloquent will take care of that. Eloquent assumes you know what you're doing, even if you don't. it'll handle that for you. If you don't want to do mass assignment, that's fine, you can just leave that off. So let's add a widget model factory so we can add some fake widgets. So we'll create a new model factory, or in our factory's model factory.php file. And what you're going to use Faker to create random word widgets. And then for description, we're going to tell Faker to use 3 paragraphs. And then we're going to tell Faker to use a random float with 2 decimal places between 20 and a bunch of 9s for a value of a price. You'll see in a minute that Faker thinks our widgets are very valuable. So now we can say, let's create a seeder class for our widgets. So we can create seeder that will add widgets to the database through its own class. Now this seems like a lot of extra code where we could just put this in our seeder class. You totally can. You definitely can. In your database seeder class, you see here we have our users from before, but now we also have this call widget seeder class. Now the primary difference between these 2 ways of seeding data into your database is when you're running the factory itself, you won't get any feedback that it was seeded. Some people don't care. Some people like to see it. Because we're using a widget seeder class, we get the feedback. We're not doing that for the user, we don't. So now we can look at our users table and we can see that we got relatively legitimate looking users and emails. And everybody's password is secret, so it's the same hash. We can look at our widgets table and we can see that Faker thinks our widgets are super expensive. But you can also see that our updated at and our created ads were also populated. We didn't have to set those. Now how do we do routing? Now that we have a model, we have some data in our database, how do we get to it? Well, we're going to open up the web routes file, and routes start off as a closure. You just say route get, we're going to say a root, and then we're just going to return a view named welcome. And again, why are there 3 routes files? Well, there's one for HTTPS, there's one for API, and there's one for console apps if you ever get that far. Or if you ever write console apps in Laravel. I love writing them in Laravel, it's fantastic. So let's add a widgets route. So we're going to say route get slash widgets. We're going to say widgets equals widget : all. This is a Laravel facade, which is different than design pattern facade. Laravel facade is essentially a static proxy. This tells Eloquent that on the app widget class, we're going to run the all method, which translates into a select all from widgets MySQL query that gets executed in return. Now, because we're just going to return widgets here, Laravel says, okay, you have this collection object, and a collection object is like an array on steroids. It's a lot better than an array. It's a special class in Laravel that you can do a lot of array type methods on. You can do random and pick a random result from the collection. You can do first, you can do sorting, you can do filtering, you can do tons of stuff with the collections. But because it's a collection class that contains a lot of widgets, potentially, if you return that from your route, Laravel says, well, you're returning a collection object, I bet you probably want this in JSON. So it just turns and gives you JSON. So you can see, there's our widgets. Our very expensive widgets. So front-end development. I am a terrible front-end developer. Anybody I've ever worked with or talked to will probably confirm this. I'm awful at it. Laravel makes it relatively painless. There is a package that they have renamed that Jeffrey Way has written. They've renamed it 4 or 5 times. I believe it's called Laravel Mix now. But essentially all you have to do is run npm install from the root of your project. And then you can run gulp, which I think you actually run npm now instead of gulp. But essentially it compiles all of these default resource files for you and throws them into the destination automatically. I couldn't tell you how to set that up. I depend on Laravel to do that because I hate that stuff. But what this allows me to do, it allows me to look like I know what I'm doing. and impress a lot of people, and that's awesome. So what we're doing here is we're using this package and we're requiring Laravel extra views. This, we can use Vue.js if we wanted to, relatively easy, out of the box. And we're going to say, all right, here's my Sass file. I want you to mix that. Treat this like Sass. And then Webpack, I want you to run Webpack against my app.js, which is where all my applications.js is going to be. So now when we get to a layout, all we have to do is pull in, oh, I didn't do it on this, oh, here it is. We can pull in our app.css file and our app.js, and we have Bootstrap because it's in NPM by default. So we can start writing Bootstrap immediately. This yield title, this is a Blade templating engine syntax. You say @yield in title. This is a layout. What we would do is this would be a top-level view that we would extend in other views to be able to put content in certain places. So if we wanted our index to have an app name and then whatever our app name is there, we would put it in the view in the title variable. And what that looks like is we would have this index.blade as a Bootstrap example, and we'll say extends layouts.app. And here we have dot notation is actually folder notation. So when you say extends, it already knows you're extending a view. So it starts in the views folder. So you only have to tell it where from that point, that relative point. And then we say section called title is going to be the Bootstrap example page. So let's go return a view. So instead of returning our JSON object or our collection, we're going to return this Bootstrap example index that we just created. And we also added a bunch of Bootstrap example code just to demonstrate that, hey, our JavaScript is working. We're JavaScript experts. Now let's clean up our layout. Let's take out a bunch of the junk from the Bootstrap we don't want. Let's also yield some content down here. This is really important. This allows us to set up a container in Bootstrap, a main container, and dump any content from a view there. So now we can go build a widgets index view. An index view for our widgets would be, show me all the widgets in the table maybe. So we'll have extends our layouts.app. Our section title will be our widgets index. And then we have this content. So anything in this content section will get injected into the layout upstream. So we have our widgets object, and we'll just loop over it, just like you would in PHP. And you access it with double brackets and a variable name. And this is a widget object. It is a representation, it is an instance of our model. So it's a representation of our row. So we have direct access to each field. Now we need to actually return our correct view. Now we've created a view. We also need to pass our data into it. So we say return widgets.index. So this is our views folder with the widgets folder / index.blade.php. That's how it's translated. So that's a ton of typing you didn't have to do. It makes this really concise and easy to read. And then we're going to say with a variable called widget. So we're going to refer to a widgets variable in our view, just like I showed you in the for each loop. And we're going to pass it the contents of the variable widgets, which we know is our collection object. So now we say localhost 8000/widgets, and we don't get JSON. We actually get our beautiful Bootstrap, amazing design front-end website with our widget information and our very high-priced widgets. So how can we test our application? Ever since Laravel 4.2, Laravel has made a very concerted effort to make testing easier. Laravel got a lot of backlash in the 3 and 4 days because it was so hard to test. And there has been so much work put into that to make it better. 5.5 is by far the easiest version of Laravel that's probably ever been out there to test. The testing tooling is much better than it ever has been, and it's better than almost any other framework I've seen. So this is a default test to check our home page. So we're going to extend the test case, which is a Laravel-specific test case. Now this is just pure PHP. Now, we're not doing anything except extending a test case that has a lot of Laravel syntactic sugar wrapped around it. So we're going to say this visit, so it'll open a connection to root, and we expect to see tasks and widgets. Now we're only looking for these strings here. We don't care if they're links, we don't care where they are on the page, just that they're there. What's actually happening under the hood here is it's doing a curl or guzzle request to your application and parsing the HTML contents that are rendered. We're also going to say this assert response okay. This just checks to make sure that the response was 200. So when we run that test, we know that we can hit our home page. We know that we can see our menu navigation items, or we assume that there are menu navigation items. So we have relative confidence that this is working. Now, I'll warn you, this is not a unit test. This is an acceptance test. It also could be qualified as a feature test. The difference between an acceptance test and a feature test is very blurry. Except when you get into the point where you're running a full-blown Phantom.js instance or a Selenium instance, and you're running tests against that, I would argue that's pure acceptance testing and not feature testing at that point, or functional testing. So what about our widgets? How do we actually test our widgets? Well, we're going to use a database transactions middleware, or our trait here. This allows us to poke through the database in our test and have the changes rolled back after the test finishes. That way we don't corrupt our local database with failing tests or passing tests. So we can test our widgets route by saying visit/widgets. Make sure you see our widgets index, which is the title of our page, and then assert the response was okay. All right, well that's great. That tells us the page works. Well, let's test that the view has data. So we can say, okay, this visit/widgets, we see the page as widgets, and then we can say assert view has widgets. So this actually looks at the view that was rendered and assumes and makes sure that the view has this widgets variable. So if we went to our route and renamed that, this test would fail. Let's test to make sure some data exists. This is where we're actually touching the database. So we're going to say widget equals factory app widget create one. And then we're going to visit our widgets index page, which we know will list all of our widgets, right? So you would expect to be able to see the widget we just created. So this is an example of using the factory in your test to actually create a row in your database and test to make sure that that data that was inserted by the test is actually in your database. So we can run our tests. We'll see that we have 9 tests and we have 30 assertions for whatever point in building this application I had taken that screenshot or remember to take that screenshot. Don't be frightened by low test count and high assertion count. A lot of people look at that and say, that's not unit tests. And I'll say, you're right, they're not. And I'm okay with that. Because I'm testing my application and I'll write my unit test later. And honestly, I don't really write a lot of unit tests for my own projects because I write acceptance tests. I write other tests. I'll write unit tests for the day job. That's what they pay me to do. So we can also have route groups. And the most beneficial thing here is if you want to group middleware. Like if you want to use the web middleware or the auth middleware, you can just create this closure of a group and put routes in there. If you have a widgets URL that you're going to have several endpoints on, you're going to have /widgets, you're going to have /widgets add, you're going to have /widgets update or delete, or maybe you're following RESTful conventions, you can have a route group that's widgets. That way you don't have to keep typing the same widgets. Now, one of my favorite features in Laravel is form requests. Mainly because there's a lot of black magic, but it's also really awesome as soon as it clicks. So we're going to create a widget create request. And we're going to use this to validate our logic when we create a widget from our app. So we have this create request class, and we have 2 required methods here. An authorized method and a rules method. The authorized method tells us who is allowed to post this request, post this endpoint. Here we're just going to say return true because we expect that if we have somebody that is able to create widgets, that we're already putting them behind the auth login in our routes file. You can also do a check there to see if the user was logged in, and the user would have to be logged in to post this request. The rules array is using the Laravel validator to specify, okay, we expect the name, its required field, and it can only be a maximum of 255 characters. Because when we created our table, it was a 255 character length field. Our description is required, and our price is required. Now when we build our HTML form, we're going to use Bootstrap, we're going to create our forms, basic input stuff, and then we're going to create our widget route. So what we're going to do is we're going to say route post, because this is posting to the widget's endpoint, and we're going to pass in this widget create request as this request variable. So what's going to happen is Laravel is going to process this request through that widget create request class before any of this code is run. So if that passes, if it passes our authorize method, which right now is return true, so of course it will, and if it passes our validator library, then we get into this method and we say, okay, well, let's create a new widget. Let's assign the name to the request name. Let's assign the description to the request description. Let's assign the price to the price, and we'll save the widget. And then we'll redirect to our widget index. What does this look like in the browser? You can see basic, awesome front-end development, because we're great at Bootstrap. So how do we test this? How do we make sure this form works? Well, we'll create a form, or we'll create a new test called test form submit works. We're going to say this visit widgets add. We're going to type the string test widget into the name field. We're going to call our description great widget. We're going to put $49.99 in for our price. We're going to press something that says add widget. We don't know if this is a button, an href. We don't know what that is. We're just going to press it and hope it works. Then we're going to expect to see that the page, or the URL, is widgets. Because remember, we're redirecting to our widgets index after we process our add widget. So then we can go a step further. Okay, let's look in the database at the widgets table where the name matches this, the description matches this, and the price matches this. So we're actually translating that to a select all from widgets where name equals test, description equals, and price equals. So we're digging into the database, and if it can't find that row, it'll fail the test. So we know there's a problem somewhere in saving our widget. Now this is all great and everything, but now we have a handful of closures in our routes file, and it's starting to get long. It's kind of gross. So let's start breaking this up into controllers. So now that we have a couple of operations for widgets, we're going to create a widget controller. We're going to tell Artisan to do that for us. And then we can just copy and paste our code from our routes file right into our widget method, our controller methods for our widgets. So we take everything, just move it over. We have an index method, we have an add method, we have a create. And then we can refactor our routes file to this. And we can also name our routes now. So now we can name our routes, and then everywhere else in your application, instead of routing to the path, you can route to the name. And if you ever have to update a route path, you update it in one place, which is huge. But I will tell you, I've never done that in an application, but I like knowing that I can. So we now have our create method. Does the exact same thing that our closure did, but it's in a nice, neat controller method. And because we're awesome and we're writing tests, we can run our test again, and we can tell that we didn't break anything. So model relationships. There's one-to-one, where a user would have a phone number. There's one-to-many, where a post would have many contacts or comments. There's a many-many, where a user would have many roles. There's also a couple others that I'm not going to get into. So an example of a one-to-one would be a task belongs to a user. And this is where we just we open up a task model, and we add a user method, and we say this belongs to the path of the class name and the namespace of our user model. So we're saying when you have a task object and you run a user method, look at the user model and find a record in the user row that matches the task ID of this task. Because we're using defaults, we're following the Laravel way of doing things with Eloquent, we don't have to specify foreign keys here, or local keys. Laravel just assumes that we're doing it right. Now, if you are using a legacy system and you're implementing Laravel, you're rewriting Laravel, and you don't have schema control, you can easily override all of this stuff. It's just more code. So the opposite of this relationship is a user would have many tasks. So we could just say tasks method on the user model, and you can has many tasks. Now we can query our model by saying task user name. So we have an instance of our task, and we're looping over them, we're dumping out all of our tasks. We want to see who a task is assigned to, so we'll say task user name. Now, this brings in an interesting problem if you've never run into it, but it's called the n+1 problem. What's happening when we run that relationship query is it does another database query. It actually stops the loop in the rendering of the view and runs another select. So it will run n+1 amounts of time for however the value of n is. So you have your one query, and then if you have 50 tasks, it'll run 50 more queries to figure out the users. Now the solution to the n+1 problem is eager loading. What we can do is we can tell Eloquent to go ahead and eager load all of our tasks with the user relationship and say get. So now we turn that into 2 queries instead of 50 plus 1 or n+1. So how do we get it to the server? Well, we talked about one of the ways earlier, a service called Envoyer. Now, Envoyer was born out of a package called Envoy. Envoy is a package that actually had a pull request accepted to today. We bumped a version. It's the first time we've released it in almost a year and a half. But it's really awesome because it's super stable, and it is an awesome way to be able to run remote SSH commands from your local machine. So like Chef and Puppet and Ansible would allow you to do that kind of thing. Envoy allows you to do it in a much simpler fashion without having to have all of that overhead and without freaking out your DevOps people too much, if you have DevOps people. The only downside to Envoy is it only supports Mac and Linux. Windows users are out of luck, but you could use the Windows Linux subsystem. That would work fine for you here, and this will allow you to use it. So Envoy uses envoy.blade.php, and just like our views, it's essentially a view. We have servers. We're going to create an array of servers. We're going to call prod. We're going to give it a user and a domain name. We're going to say create a new task called deploy to prod. It's going to run on the prod server, and here's the commands to deploy. You could also have multiple tasks where you can have a deploy prod and you can have a deploy dev if you have a dev site on the same server. You could also inline all of your SSH commands to be able to pull down your application, update get, run composer install, all that stuff that you would need to build your application. Now Laravel also makes OAuth login super easy. There's a package called Laravel Socialite that allows you to easily use Bitbucket, Google, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn out of the box. And there's another library that is community driven that offers like 30 more other OAuth services. So what you essentially can do is require the Socialite package, you add it to your app service providers, you tell Laravel about it, which is something you shouldn't have to do in 5 anymore. This is auto discovery now in 5.5, which is really cool. If you've ever dealt with Laravel, you know, you can understand how cool that is. So you configure Socialite in your your services.php config file. So you have your Stripe configuration if you were using Stripe. If we wanted to use the GitHub API to log in a user, you would just put in your GitHub app credentials. And then in your auth controller, you have to just make a couple of changes. You would have to have this redirect provider method and tell Socialite to redirect to GitHub. If you've never used OAuth or if you're not familiar with how OAuth works, what it does is your application redirects a user off-site to have them authenticate with a service, and then that service, after they authenticate properly, returns back to you with a token. And you can assume that that token is good because it's coming back from the service. So we have to be able to redirect to our provider, and we have to handle the callback back to our application. And what we're doing on the callback is we're just grabbing the user information that GitHub's returning to us. That way we know their email, their name, whatever information they're getting GitHub. We have to add the routes for Socialite, which we have our off GitHub, which is where they hit to get redirected off of our application, and then the callback. And you have to tell the GitHub app what that callback URL is, or none of this is going to work, because they're never going to get redirected back to your app. Now, that I've bored you all with how Laravel works, we'll talk a little bit about making some money. But not really about making money, just letting people give you money. It's up to you to figure out how to make them give you money. So, Laravel Cashier is a relatively simple package. It's an expressive interface to Stripe and Braintree subscription billing services. It's free, it's open source, it's easy to add to Laravel. It's designed for subscription, not one-off charges. It's relatively well supported. It's a very well-rounded package. It has kind of fallen to the wayside in favor of Spark, just because people who are doing subscription nowadays are more often selling a service to go along with that subscription. Just like Socialite, you'll install it as a composer dependency. You used to have to add it to your app service provider. You shouldn't have to do that anymore. You have a Cashier migration, because Cashier actually needs database tables. So you actually add these migration files that creates extra fields on your user table. So this is an example of not creating a schema, but adding to an existing schema. And you would create a subscriptions table. You also have a billable trait, which gives you all of the methods that handle the subscription and the renewal of the subscription, the payment processing, all of the CRUD that goes into accepting payments. Now your API keys, put them in your .env file. That's where you should put all of your API keys, because that doesn't get version control. That way, if anybody ever leaks your database, or sorry, leaks your version control system, or somebody accidentally makes your AOL repo that is super private, super sensitive information public on the AOL project, that you have a way of going around it. Not that that's ever happened. Ever. So subscribing to user, this would be an example where you've already processed, you've sent a request out to Stripe. Stripe says, yes, this person has tons of money, here, take some of it. Stripe gives you a callback. This is how you would process that. So you would say, get the credit card token from the credit card request, and then you would find the user, and then you would say, new subscription made. This is a package that you have to set up this in Stripe yourself. Laravel can't do that. They can't do everything for you. And then the term, which is also what you set up in Stripe. So this is like somebody's Netflix subscription, if you're building the next Netflix. Now Laravel Spark. Spark is a SaaS in a box. It is a product. I believe it's $300 still for limited sites. It's $100 for a site. The cool thing is you can buy a license and use it on as many dev sites as you want. You don't pay for it until you launch it. So I've had a Spark license since it went on sale for the first time. I have started probably 50 Spark projects, but I've never launched any of them because that's just kind of the developer I am. So Spark has its own private documentation. Because it's a paid project, once you actually have your payment process approved and all that fun stuff, you get access to a special version of the forums. Any questions so far? We're almost done. Awesome. So artisan commands. So if you want to write console apps, traditionally in PHP, you would do this via the Symfony console component, which is a fantastic way to write console applications. Well, Artisan is a Symfony console application. And you can easily extend it by writing your own Artisan commands. So you don't have to do all of the hard bootstrapping, well not really hard, but complex and tedious bootstrapping of a Symfony component, because Laravel's already done it for you. So of course, in true sentient fashion, we're going to use Artisan to create an Artisan command. So we'll say make command, and we're going to make a basic command. And it'll create the file in this commands folder. And you have to add it to the kernel. So you have to tell the Artisan kernel about the command that you created. And then you can start doing stuff with your commands. And this is going to be a little outdated because they change this every version. It's like they can't figure out if they want to call the variables a certain thing or if they want to call the fire method execute. I think it's gone from fire to execute to run and then back at least once in the past 5 versions. It's ridiculous. So you have your signature, which is the command you're actually going to run. You're going to run artisan this. You have your description, which is the help. And then you're going to have a constructor, if you need to do any construction, if you're injecting any models, if you're doing any setup for your application, or your class, sorry. And you have a handle method. Again, it could be fire, it could be execute. I honestly don't know what it is in 5.5. I haven't gotten that far yet. Excuse me. So now we can run our basic command, and nothing happens because our handle method is empty. So let's add it. Let's add something, let's make something happen. So we're going to save this info, running the basic command. And we run that, and then we get fancy green text saying, hey, we ran the basic command. Now, if you've ever written a Symfony console component, you're probably already really happy because there's about 100 lines of code we haven't written that you have to write for Symfony to make the same thing happen. And there's lots of injection that you have to do. You have to inject the output interface, you have to inject the input interface for input, and it's a pain. Laravel makes it super easy. You can also output warnings. That'll come across as yellow. And then if the user does something really terrible, you can give them an error. And that comes across in the scary red background. And I have another question slide that I left in there. This is actually from an 8-hour training. So if I was doing the 8-hour training, you all would actually be doing coding exercises and building the widgets and building the task stuff. So if you want to do that, come up to PHP World in November. I'm actually doing a training class there. If you like what you see, you really want to get into some Laravel. So the other cool thing Laravel does that makes it really easy is authentication. You can do one command, and it will scaffold out all your authentication controllers, routes, as well as views. Now again, this isn't the old scaffolding code that you would go and rewrite or refactor and throw away. This is code you push to production. It's fantastic code. You can have your view files. Just see that we added those to version control down here. We have our auth folder, we have password resets, we have our login, we have our register, we have our home controller. Oh, I just had that file, that was not important. You have our auth routes, which is just a shortcut down here on line 34. That's all we have to do. Laravel will inject all the other routes for you. Now, if you looked at the layout file that Laravel just overrode compared to the layout file that we had before, you can see that Laravel destroyed our amazing front-end development skills. It's okay, we can fix it again. So now to register a new user, you just go to the /register method, and we have a fancy form, and the form validation and all that stuff is already written for you. You don't have to write any of that validation stuff. It's fantastic. You don't have to write the logic to confirm the password or anything. Once you create a new user, you're automatically logged in, and you see absolutely nothing because we haven't written anything yet. So we can add our navigation back, and we can use these URL generators up at the top. We have an href link, and we can say, echo out a URL to /login, and it'll build links for us. You can also have, am I doing it here yet? Oh, no, I'm not, but I'm actually doing something I will show you, which is really important when you're building forms. Laravel will handle CSRF for you automatically. You don't ever have to think about CSRF except to run that tag on every form you open. Laravel will handle all the other CSRF stuff for you. If you don't know what CSRF is, I envy you. It's a mess. That sounds like a lot of you know what CSRF is. So we add our navigation back, we can do stuff in our application again. We can go to our widgets page, hey, our widgets work. Now you can also do multiple middlewares. So here we're going to put auth and web. So to get to any of these routes now, you have to be authenticated and you have to be in the web middleware, which the web middleware may not even be around. I don't think it was a default for very long. It essentially was making sure you look like a legit browser session. If you're not logged in and you try to go to those routes, you get redirected to the login page. You didn't have to write this code. It's fantastic. I mean, it's just one command gave you all this code. Now, if you were in my training session and you had written all this code and you had written all the tests for this code, I would tell you to run your test again. And you would see that there's 4 failures. Any idea, based on what you've seen, what little you've seen, any idea what those 4 failures are? Well, because you haven't been in, I'll give you a little slack. It's not that big of a deal. It's because we protected our URLs and our tests weren't acting as a user. They failed because they couldn't get to the routes. So now what we have to do is we have to generate a user to act out the test, which is super helpful for testing roles and permissions and authentication. If you have a very complex permission scheme, you can create a user, put them in certain permission schemes, and then test parts of your application to verify they can only do what you want them to be able to do. We can update our test, run our test, and we see it passed. I've got way too many of these question slides. And actually, this is the second to last slide, so this is the legitimate question slide. So does anybody have any questions?
So, right there when you were creating that user, you didn't actually execute a login, did you?
No. Well, wait, did I? Hold on. I might have. The acting as?
Yeah.
No, under the hood that actually does some session magic. It makes it look like it did.
Yeah.
But it didn't actually go to the URL and just fill out the form and submit it or anything now.
So you were showing us the database transaction
Yes.
feature before. With that one, are you creating a user that remains in the database after the test is completed, since you're not using database transaction?
Oh, good catch. I am.
Sorry.
I am, because I'm not using the transaction here. Yeah, you're right. So yeah, I would actually end up with a lot of extra test users here.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, so if you didn't want to do that, you could just use that trait. A lot of times what I'll do is if something's just not working right, I need to debug it, I'll remove that trait so I can go see what is actually getting saved in the database, because that's usually a sign of I'm doing something wrong or my validator's not working right. So that's probably what happens I just didn't think about. Any other questions? All right. Here's my contact info. Please feel free to find me on Twitter if you have any questions about Laravel. Feel free to email me. I'm on IRC. I'm on the Laravel Slack. I'm on the NoxDev Slack as well. I'm actually leaving town tomorrow, but I will be back probably in a couple months. So thanks for coming.